Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 15th episode of the Nature Connects Us webinar series. We're super excited that you could join us today. We're hanging out down here at the Pontotoc Ridge Preserve in southern Oklahoma, just south of Ada, and it's in the Chickasaw Nation. We're curious though, where are you hanging out at? Where are you from? Find that chat button and text it to us. Let us know where you're at. We have a really special segment for you today because we're going to talk about snakes. And we're really fortunate because we have a professional biologist with us here on hand today. At TNC, we do not regularly handle wildlife. We encourage others to do so. Today's segment is not about how to handle snakes. Today's segment is about the myths and the truths behind snakes. And we're going to get to talk about their behavior. So we're really lucky because we have Jeanine Lackey with us today, and she is a professional biologist with over 15 years of experience researching and studying snakes and their behavior. So Jeanine will get to share with us and show us some of her slithery friends and talk with us about them, and she'll even answer your questions after her presentation. Jeanine is the Blue River and the Arbuckle Plains project manager for the Nature Conservancy here in Oklahoma. She manages five preserves down here in the southern part of the region. And she's, like I said, she's studied snakes for over 15 years. She's, as I mentioned earlier, these slithery friends. She is a trained biologist on how to handle them. And then also keep in mind, each of these guests that are here with us today are non-venomous. So we're real excited to have Jeanine. We're really excited to have you. She's going to share about 15 to 20 minutes with us, and then we'll open it up for that Q&A session. So without further ado, let's turn this over to Jeanine. Welcome, Jeanine.
Thank you. Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Like Katie said, we do have some special friends with us today. One of these guests is a speckled king snake, and we actually found him at Arbuckle Preserve. And as she said, we typically don't handle animals, and we don't recommend anybody picking up snakes or wildlife for that matter, especially if you're not sure on the identification of that animal. Since I know my snakes and I've handled lots of snakes, I knew this was non-venomous, and this is a speckled king snake. We wanted to bring him in today to show you some of the special adaptations. So if you're not sure of the identification of a snake, please don't handle snakes or wildlife in general. Before we talk about this guy specifically, I wanted to address some of the biology of snakes. So this might help folks understand a little bit more about their behavior. And if you're kind of afraid of snakes, this might help you understand why they do the things they do. And they're not like out to get people, and they're not out to chase people. But so for starters, snakes are vertebrates, just like humans. They have a backbone, a spine. And if Katie can pull up our skeleton of a snake, you'll be able to see what their skeleton looks like. They have a backbone. They have lots of little tiny ribs all the way down their body. They have internal organs just like we do. They have a central nervous system, so they have very sensitive skin. They can feel all kinds of vibrations on their skin. They have a really heightened sense of smell. And if you're wondering how they smell, well, he's flicking out his tongue right now, and he's sensing and smelling the molecules in the air. They have a pretty good sense of sight, depending on the species. And they can also hear somewhat, even though they don't have external ears. Most of the time, they pick up vibrations from the ground. And when their jaw is on the ground, the vibrations from the ground, if there's a predator or someone walking on the ground, those vibrations go to their internal ear. And that's how they kind of hear. So also, one other important biology factor is that snakes are ectotherms. And what's an ectotherm, you say? Well, humans are endotherms. That means our body temperature is controlled internally. So we have a constant state of body temperature typically. And ectotherms like snakes can't control their temperature, body temperature internally. So they rely on outside sources for adjusting their body temperature. So a snake has to be at a certain temperature in order to find prey and to eat and to digest their food. So if they're not at the right temperature, they won't be able to forage and they won't be able to digest their food. So how do they warm up their body? Well, they get their warmth from the outside temperature, or if the air is cool, they will bask on a rock that has absorbed some heat. If you see snakes on the road at night and you're not sure why they're out there, that's because they are getting radiant heat from the road. And sometimes that's when they might unfortunately get run over. So if you're out driving around at night, be careful of snakes on the road. They're just thermoregulating on that warm surface, trying to warm up so that they can hunt. And being an ectotherm, that means they don't have to eat very often. So their body temperature isn't constant all the time like humans. So humans use a lot of energy. Endotherms need constant energy. That's why we have to eat every day. And the snakes don't have to eat every day because they don't have a constant temperature. So typically they might eat once a week, depending on the outside temperature, maybe every 2 weeks. Some little snakes will eat once a day. So, so you wonder maybe what they're doing in the winter, right? Because it gets cold in Oklahoma in the winter. Snakes actually do something what we call brumation. And brumation is kind of like hibernation, but not really. Brumation is that they're awake and their body temperature is lowered, very low, but they're not really sleeping. They're just kind of inactive. Okay, so this guy, I think that's all I wanted to cover with that. If anybody has questions at the end, we can talk about snake biology a little bit more. So today we wanted to talk about some myths and misconceptions about snakes. And a lot of people, what I hear saying is that snakes are slimy because they have scales, and they do have scales. That's very true. But if you could touch the snake, you would feel like he's very smooth. He's not slimy at all. He's actually very dry. Snake skin is made up of scales all over the body, and they actually have 3 layers of skin. There's the outside layer, which is the layer they shed. There's the scale layer, and then there's an underneath layer, and it's all connected. So you couldn't pluck off a scale because actually it would hurt him. And their skin is all basically one layer and connected. So like I said before, they're very sensitive to touch and senses. Another misconception is that people think that you could tell how old a rattlesnake is by how many rattles are on their tail. And that's also not true, because snakes shed whenever they grow out of their skin. And so that could be 3 times a year, it could be 6 times a year, it could be once a year. So it's just really, you're unable to tell exactly how old those snakes are based on the amount of rattles that they have. It's just like us growing out of our clothes, and you have to get new clothes if you get too big, and that's what happens. One other really cool adaptation with snakes is that they don't have eyelids. And you're wondering, well, doesn't dirt get in their eyes? Well, they have a special scale over their eye that's called a spectacle. And when they shed, that spectacle actually sheds too. Right before snakes shed, they kind of turn a cloudy bluish color. And during that time, if you run across a snake that has kind of cloudy eyes, that means he's going to shed. They don't see very well during that time. And so they can be a little bit more defensive and a little bit more aggressive when they're right before they're getting ready to shed. Another misconception that I hear about is that snakes chase people and chase them down and run after them. And I think if people understood the biology of snakes and just understood why they're doing the behaviors they do, they would understand that snakes really aren't chasing people. They can only move at most like 3 miles per hour. And they can move pretty quickly, but typically what I found is that if a snake feels threatened, they have several defense mechanisms. And the first one is that they can camouflage themselves. And hopefully whoever the intruder is or the predator, and they see humans as predators, will just not notice them. If they have an opportunity, they will move away quickly and hide. If they get cornered or they don't feel like they have an escape route, then they will coil up. And if they still feel threatened, they may flatten their head. For non-venomous snakes, they may flatten their head to pretend to look like a venomous snake. And then as a last resort, if they feel threatened and don't have an escape route, they could strike. And they may lunge while they're striking, because basically that's their last line of defense. As you can see from this little guy, they don't have appendages, so they can't go grab, a baseball bat or a knife to protect themselves. So basically all they have to do protect themselves with is their mouth. These snakes do have some teeth, little tiny itsy bitsy teeth, and they're pointed backwards. And that's to hold their prey in their mouth when they do catch some prey. So basically, the myth about snakes chasing people, it might be a little exaggerated, and they're just trying to defend themselves. So what I always tell people is, if you do come across a snake and he doesn't have an escape route, he's not moving away, I just tell people to back up 6 feet and move over about 3 feet. Give them an escape route and just let them go on their way. One other defense mechanism snakes do have is that they will emit a musky substance from their cloaca. And that is another way that they can deter predators, because it smells really bad. And this snake did that to me when I picked him up originally. It does not smell very good, which is why I have my paper towel here. But that's just one more mechanism that they have to try to deter predators. So when they see people, you can imagine, this snake is not very big, and humans are very large compared to the size of this animal. So that, of course, they feel threatened. Like I said, this is a speckled king snake, and you see the color pattern on this guy. This is the color pattern of the king snakes that you'll find in Southeast Oklahoma. There's a couple different color patterns of these guys, and he's pretty young. He is not very old, maybe a year at the most, I would think. And as he gets older, the yellow spots will show up more. And if you're wondering why they call them king snakes, well, that's because these snakes will eat other snakes, and they are immune to the venom of venomous snakes. So these are kind of good snakes to have around. Snakes aren't their main prey source. They will eat rodents and lizards and birds, mostly rodents though. And you'll find these guys in wetter areas like wetlands, prairies, marshes. They are that type of snake. We do have other king snakes, and those snakes are more upland type habitat snakes. This guy, I shouldn't call it a guy. I don't really know if it's a guy or a girl. You'll see him sticking out his tongue, and that is not how they catch their prey. What he's doing is, if you see, he's got a fork, he's got little prongs on his tongue, and he is actually smelling the molecules in the air. And after he draws his tongue in, those little barbs on his tongue are inserted into an organ called the Jacobson's organ. And the tongue is split, and so those little split tongue go into separate orifices, and then those chemicals get reported to his brain. That's how he smells for predators, and that's how he can smell his environment to warn himself if there's maybe a large predator around, and that's also how they can track their prey. And the tongue is split because he is actually, it's like, how you have surround sound stereo? Well, he has surround sound, he has surround smell. So that's why his little forks are going both ways, because he can get surround smell. It's just a better way to understand what's going on in his environment. I think that's all I need to talk about him. Let's see. King snake. They move by, as you can see, he's kind of moving with, they're very muscular. The muscles run all up and down his body, and they move by squeezing muscles behind him and pushing himself forward. I think I'm going to put him down now, the speckled king snake, and we will look at one more snake for everybody to see. We will release him right where we found him, and he will go off on his way right when we take him back. Here you go, little buddy. Little buddy. And we are going to get one more little snake here. Hi, little buddy. He's so cute. Aren't you just the cutest little thing? This is also a very juvenile snake, and he may not look that familiar because juvenile snakes sometimes look different than their adult version. This is a Western rat snake, and this guy actually was brought to me by my neighbor, who unfortunately had some glue traps out, and this guy got stuck in the glue trap. So I don't recommend using glue traps because it has far-reaching effects on other critters. So we got some vegetable oil out and unstuck him from the glue trap. And this guy will be released, probably not exactly where we found him, but very close. And I told my neighbor not to use glue traps anymore. So the Western rat snakes are very common, and they are pretty much statewide, except for maybe the very panhandle of the state. These guys are the ones you'll see climbing trees because they're very good climbers. And they're climbing trees because they do like to eat bird eggs, and they will eat baby birds. This guy right now is probably only eating very small invertebrates and small mice, baby mice, because he's so tiny. The Western rat snakes are, like I said, very common, and he's got really big eyes. You can definitely see he is not venomous because, well, his pupils are round. And venomous snakes definitely have a pretty common pattern for eye shape and head shape typically, although it's not always a sure sign of identifying a venomous snake. I'm not going to really talk about venomous snakes today unless somebody has a question about it, but we just wanted to share the information about these snakes that we found. And this little guy, he did shed after we unstuck him from the glue trap, and he's trying to kind of thermoregulate on my arm because he was a little bit chilly. Western rat snakes are also a good snake to have around the farmstead or the barns because they are very good at rodent control. They eat a lot more rodents than any other prey items, and they can get very large. These are probably maybe not one of the biggest snakes in Oklahoma, but they can probably get up to about 6 feet. Very large, and you'll see them as they get older. They kind of turn all black. They sometimes might have a pattern, but if you have an all black snake, and it's very large, it might be a Western rat snake. We also have other rat snakes too. And if you didn't know, Oklahoma has 55 species of snakes, which is crazy biological diversity. And only 8 of those are actually venomous. So we have a diverse array of habitats in Oklahoma. Therefore, we have a diverse array of snakes. So it's pretty crazy how many snakes we have. And there are a few rare snakes too. The mud snake and the Gulf swamp snake, I think, are kind of rare in Oklahoma, and those are found in the southeast part of the state. So let's see, I think that's all I need to talk about this guy anyway. How are we doing for time?
You're doing great on time.
Okay. Okay. This guy, like I said, he can climb trees. So if you see a snake in a tree, it's probably a Western rat snake. They can actually climb up buildings, like the side of our building right here. It's metal building, but all they have to do is wedge themselves in between two cracks or brace themselves against something, and they can climb up the building. And I think that's probably what got our Phoebe eggs up on the building that Phoebes were nesting. But that's just the way things are out in nature, right? I have been handling snakes for about 15 years and surveying snakes. So I don't don't recommend people handle snakes unless you are positive on ID and if you're surveying for snakes or doing research, of course. So we do help people survey for snakes here and know where to look for them. Another topic I wanted to just touch on is snake safety. So if you do happen across a snake, I would just, like I said, let it escape. If it is not moving and you need someone to relocate it, there are resources to do that. And we can talk about that in a few seconds. If you're out in nature and you're hiking and exploring, some of the really good steps to take are watch where you're walking and watch where you put your hands. If you're climbing up rocks and scrambling, just make sure you watch where your hands are. If it's a really hot day, snakes aren't going to be out because it's too hot for them. They do have temperature maximums that they can't go over. So if it's a hot day, snakes are probably not going to be out during the day. If it's a moderately warm day, snakes could be basking on a rock or a log. So just make sure you watch where you put your hands, where you're walking. If it's a cooler day, there may be a snake coiled up in some leaf litter and they're just hanging out and they have really good camouflage. So we just pay attention to where we're walking and where we're putting our hands. Step over the logs, not on top, that type of thing. And if you become familiar with the snakes that we have in your area, that also helps people identify if it's venomous or non-venomous. These guys are completely harmless. They can bite, just like any animal that has a mouth. Your dog or your cat can bite. And they typically only bite if provoked or grabbed and if they're afraid. So when I got him out, we're just handling him very gently and we're not squeezing him. So he doesn't feel threatened. So he seems pretty calm right now. And then after we're done, we will be releasing him too. So for resources for snake identification, we have really good ones in Oklahoma. And I think Katie's going to put that up on the screen, but Oklahoma Department of Wildlife came out with a new field guide to snakes and reptiles and amphibians of Oklahoma. It's a very good guide, and it has all the snakes, reptiles, amphibians of Oklahoma. It's only $20. It's a great find. And then there is a Facebook page called Snake Identification of Oklahoma, I think. And that group will help people identify snakes. If you have a picture of one, you can post it on there, and they will usually identify it pretty quickly and help you identify if you have a snake by your house or something like that. There's also members of that group that might be able to help relocate a snake. If you have a venomous snake that is posing a danger to kids or pets, and you feel better if somebody came and got it. I think there are people that will do that. I have never done that, but I don't handle venomous snakes, but there are people that might come and do that depending on your location. So that's also a good resource to use. Those resources, and then just learn about the snakes that are in your area and look and see how wonderful they are and all the services that they're providing by controlling some rodent populations and invertebrates and some other kind of critters that we don't necessarily want around all that much. So I think that's all I have today. And thank you very much for attending. And we're happy to answer some questions if anybody has some.
All right, everyone. Wasn't that fascinating? How many new things did you just learn? They don't have eyelids. They can climb walls. How incredibly fascinating. Thank you so much, Jeanine, for sharing with us. So this is the fun time where you get to ask Jeanine your questions. And the way that we do this is by using the Q&A function. So if you go down to the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a Q&A button. If you do not, you might see a button that says more and has 3 dots. Click it and then click the Q&A button. So find that Q&A button on your screen, and that's where you're going to type in your questions. Also, everybody open up that Q&A button, even if you don't have a question, and you can vote on which questions you want to be answered first. So the questions with the most votes are the ones that will get addressed first. So I hope that everybody has enjoyed this session. This has been incredibly educational and so much fun. So we're really grateful for Jeanine to be able to share these with us. We did see some chats happening in the chat box too. So thank you to everyone for sharing. Looks like someone, Luann, shared a a trick with the sticky trap to cover it in cornmeal if you catch one, and then gently pull loose and add more cornmeal to keep them from getting restuck. All right, good to know. We also recommend not using the sticky pads as well. So good conversations happening in here. It looks like we have some other folks coming in here. Carrie says she loves the Snake ID group. She's learning so much. Great to know, Carrie. Thank you for sharing. All right, and we've got, oh, hey, Jose, right here in Ada. Good deal. Okay, let's see here. Our first question, and after I ask this question, we will unmute Jeanine and keep her unmuted, and I'll just ask from afar. Okay, so our first question from Lynn that has 6 votes is, please define a hot day, as in how hot is too hot for a snake to be outside? I'm in Western Oklahoma, out on the prairie, says Lynn.
Okay. Well, I guess it depends on the species, but I would say if it's over 85 and over, yeah, there could be different circumstances for different species, but I would say 85. Snakes can be active if it's 60 and above, so you can see snakes during the winter if it's a 60-degree day. But if it's over 85 and it's, the air temperature is pretty constant like that, I would say snakes probably aren't going to be active during the day. Now, if it's a nighttime and it drops down to 80, snakes are going to be very active during the nighttime when it's warm out. So that's my best estimate for how hot it would be for snakes not to be active during the day.
Good to know.
Tulsa. Oh, okay. Urban areas, well, there could be a lot of different snakes there. And little snakes can be found in a lot of different places, like the ringneck snake is pretty common. They're very small. They're like 7 inches, 8 inches. They have a little red ring around their neck. And they can be found pretty much under, rocks and debris and in leaf piles and brush piles. You could find a Western rat snake there. You could find, oh gosh, I can't even think of some of the snakes that would be up there. Whoa, sorry, buddy. In that field guide though, they have range maps on there. So you can see all the different snakes that are in that area. I'm trying to think what else I had. I had a worm snake by my house. Of course, we have some venomous snakes too, but I don't know that that many would occur there in Tulsa. I would recommend getting that book and looking at the range maps for all the snakes that are there. We have a lot of snakes, but I can't really quite think of all the common ones right off the top of my head, other than these 2 that we had here today. And some of them are only going to be found in like certain habitat types. They're not going to be found in urban settings. But if somebody is concerned, I would definitely get that field guide and look at the range maps on there. Yes, these 2 snakes have a statewide distribution. The speckled king snake had a statewide distribution, so they can be found in prairies, wetlands, marshes. They can also be found, woodland edges and kind of random habitat types, but they are more of a wetland specialist. And then the Western rat snake is very common. They are statewide distribution, except for the very far panhandle. They're not really out that far. And these can be found in any setting, basically. Barns, urban settings, wherever you have prey items like mice and rodents and lizards, birds, bird eggs. So they're very, very common. We have other rat snakes too, but this is probably the more common one for that part of the state anyway. And there's other species up too that only occur like in the northeast part of the state, like the Ozark area.
Perfect. So what I hear you saying is get that book.
Get so that helpful. Book. Yes. And the snake identification Facebook page is very helpful too. And those people are very knowledgeable and they can answer lots of questions as well.
All right, fantastic. So Just to repeat the question, I accidentally forgot to unmute myself a moment ago, but that question is Bob was asking if the two snakes that Jeanine was showing us today were common in northeastern Oklahoma. So that's what she was addressing. All right, our next question is an anonymous attendee, and they're curious, Jeanine, what is the chemical compounds that make up snake venom?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that, actually. Maybe somebody else knows that on the chat.
Right. If somebody knows the answer and you want to chat that in, please do. That is one that Jeanine says she doesn't have the answer. Anonymous attendee, hopefully we can get those that information for you. If not, maybe Dr. Google can help us with that one. All right, so we're going to move on to the next one. A friend of ours named Julie. Thank you, Julie, for typing in. Julie is curious. First off, she thoroughly enjoyed the webinar. Thank you, Jeanine. And she's curious, is it true that copperhead snakes' favorite food are cicadas?
Oh, I have heard that, yes. I don't know if it's their favorite food, but they do eat cicadas. They will eat cicadas. And copperheads are usually found, pretty kind of everywhere, but they will eat cicadas, and they will eat other things too, in addition to cicadas.
Okay, and you can leave it on. You don't have to mute it. Okay, so our next question, Jeanine, comes from Bill LaRue. Bill is asking, or excuse me, William, sorry, is asking, when does this rat snake change its color?
Well, it depends on the actual individual animal. I had a rat snake that was about 6 years old, and he finally turned black. However, I saw another very large rat snake, adult rat snake, and he was not all black. You could still see the blotches on him, and his blotches were kind of reddish. So it just depends on the individual animal. Probably in about 2 years, 3 years, they will start to turn all black, but you could still maybe see some of the pattern in some of those snakes, depending on the individual animal. This guy is really young. He's probably only maybe a year old, if even that. And so I would say 2 to 3 years old, they could start changing their color. But that doesn't mean you can't run into an adult rat snake that still has the blotches on it.
Okay, interesting. Thank you for sharing. Our next question comes from Carrie. Thank you, Carrie, for writing in. She's curious, Jeanine, where would we find good information on first aid for bites, specifically venomous and non-venomous snakes? So first aid information for bites.
First aid information. I would say anything like any hospital reference site, like Mayo Clinic has really good reference site for snake bite. For venomous snakes, I would go to a reputable source like that, like Mayo Clinic or any other hospital clinic that has first aid advice. For non-venomous snakes, I've been bit a lot handling snakes, and some of my friends in Nebraska have handled lots and lots of snakes as well. And they actually swabbed all the snakes that they have captured to survey. And so they took a swab of their mouth and to see if they contained any bacteria or viruses. And out of about 450 snakes, not one snake was carrying bacteria. A water snake might be one of the few snakes that could have some sort of bacteria in their mouth, but generally these snakes are pretty clean, cleaner than probably your cat or your dog's mouth. So when I get bit, I just slightly dab some alcohol on it, and the bleeding stops, put a Band-Aid on it. And that's about it for non-venomous snakes. That's been my experience. It may be different for some people if you have allergic reactions to something like that, but generally they don't carry, they're very clean animals as far as bacteria.
Oh my goodness, that's fascinating. So speaking of interesting information, is it true, somebody wants to know that snakes can drink milk?
No. I've heard that before, that there's a milk snake and it drinks milk, but that's not actually true. They do drink water. So snakes have to find a source of water. in their daily surroundings. And if you've never seen a snake drink water, it's quite interesting. They just suck it in through their mouth, like they're sucking in. Oh, he's trying to bite me. He's like, yeah. They just suck it in through the little mouth opening, and they slurp it up like that. They don't lap it up like a dog laps water, but they just suck it in like they're sucking through a straw. But they do have to drink water. They don't drink milk.
Okay, our next question is from Amy. Do snakes have similar muscular biology to worms using longitudinal and circular muscles for locomotion?
Longitudinal locomotion. They do have circular motion, so their muscles are pretty circular in our body. Depending on the species of snake, they locomote different ways. Like you've probably seen a sidewinder. And then these guys basically push off with their muscles on the back end of their body. And so that reverberation reverberates all the way up to the front of their body. I don't know if that makes any sense. But so they're basically pushing off from the end of their body, pushing their front of their body forward. And so those muscles, their whole body circularly is covered in muscles. And so that's how they locomote basically on the ground. Now, if you're a rat snake like this and you're climbing up a building, you are just pushing each of your body parts against whatever barrier is there and then just pushing yourself forward. If they don't have anything to push against, that's hard for them to move around. I probably didn't answer that very well.
Well, hopefully that was helpful for our guests today. We do have another question that's getting some popular votes, and that is, what is the difference between venom versus poison, Jeanine?
Oh, that's a good question. So a lot of times people think that snakes are poisonous and refer to venomous snakes as poisonous, and there is a good difference. Venom is something that is injected into a prey item through the teeth. So poison is something that is ingested. So you would eat something that is poisonous, whereas the venom is injected through some kind of apparatus. So you're eating a poisonous plant and you ingest it. That plant is poisonous, not venomous. And snakes inject venom through their teeth. So that means they are venomous. It's injected.
All right, well, that is fascinating. We are learning a lot today. Okay, so we have another one that is similar to that question, Jeanine, which is, how do you tell the difference between a venomous versus a non-venomous snake? I don't know if you've already addressed that. If you have, you can kind of walk us back through that.
Yeah. Okay. There are, it's sometimes pretty interesting because non-venomous snakes can act like a venomous snake, and because there's a defense mechanism. So they will flatten their head. And so you'll hear sometimes that venomous snakes have a triangular head and it's kind of flat, which is true. But non-venomous snakes will flatten their head and make it look triangular because they have very flexible jaws and bones in their skull. Non-venomous snakes will also rattle their tail against some leaf litter, and so it sounds like a rattle. Rattlesnakes rattle their tail as well. So like I said, it's pretty difficult if you're not really, really sure on your ID if a snake is venomous or not. Pit vipers are the venomous snakes, and they tend to have a pupil that runs up and down. Non-venomous snakes, their pupils are all round. They don't have a vertical pupil. And venomous snakes tend to be kind of short and chunky, from what I have gathered. If it's a long, skinny snake like this, it's probably not venomous. But if you're not sure, just use your common sense and just be careful. That's my feeling, is that venomous snakes are kind of short and chunky and a little bit thicker. but just be sure on the ID and be respectful of all the snakes that you're not sure of the ID. I didn't mention that there is a hognose snake that is found in Nebraska, a couple different types of hognose snakes. And they are very good at flattening their head and rearing up, and they look like they're going to strike, and they can resemble a venomous snake, even though they're not venomous. So just be aware of, your habitat and where you are and what the snake is doing. If you're close enough to see the pupils, you're probably too close in my book. So just give the snake some room and take a picture of it and send it to somebody who can give you a positive ID. That's my recommendation.
Oh, wow. Okay, folks, you heard her. So if you are close enough to be able to see their pupils, you're too close. So on that note, so the whole venomous topic is pretty popular here today. Erin is asking, is there anything that someone can do to discourage venomous snakes from coming close to a rural home in a wooded, rocky habitat?
Yes. So I would recommend that around your home, I would eliminate the debris, rocks, brush piles, logs, and make sure that that's kind of cleared. Those things are cleared around your home. Of course, if you have, a wooded area in your backyard or a rock pile somewhere out in the woods, that provides pretty good habitat for a lot of different critters too, besides snakes. But I would just eliminate those things from close to your home, and then make sure you just plug up all the holes around your home so they can't get in your basement, they can't get in your attic. Snakes can squeeze through a very tiny hole, and they are very flexible. So I would recommend just making sure you plug up all those holes so they can't get into your house, your attic, or your basement. Around your foundation, if you have some concrete steps or something, make sure there aren't any holes under there. Usually they're looking for prey. So you have maybe a rodent population that they want to be near, or they're looking to thermoregulate or cool off. If they're in your basement, they're probably trying to cool off, and they're eating crickets and whatever other prey items might be down in your basement. So those are my recommendations for keeping those snakes away from your home.
Okay. All right. So our next question is coming from, let's see here. It looks like it might be an anonymous one. Okay. So this is an interesting one, actually. Your next question is from Dennis, and he's curious. All right, so Dennis is curious to know if snakes will follow wildlife. So if wildlife such as there's less birds and reptiles in the Tulsa area, will snakes follow?
If there's less wildlife, they're thinking that there will be less snakes, right? It depends on what the prey item of the snake species is. If the snake species, a lot of snakes eat rodents. So if there's plenty of mice and rats and things like that around, the snakes are just going to stay there. If the birds are declining, those snakes, like a rat snake, will find other items to eat besides birds and bird eggs. There are some specialist snakes that probably don't live in urban settings that only eat, fish or frogs. So those species might be declining if we continue to lose some of our frog and toad populations. But I think the generalist snakes, like the rat snake, they're probably going to stay, and because they're going to find other food sources, you know what I mean? Because they're pretty generalist.
All right, folks. Well, we are super grateful for you taking time with us today, Jeanine. Thank you so much for sharing your slithery friends. This has been a lot of fun and very enlightening, very educational. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of feel like we getting a little closer to one after all of that. Being able to learn more about their behavior reduces my fear of snakes and helps me have a better understanding of how they help improve the health of our ecosystem, and they play an important role. I hope we all walk away with knowing more about snakes and also knowing more about, sorry, Morgan, we're running out of time. So we'll do our best to address your question as a follow-up in the webinar. But we are running out of time, as well as battery juice and Wi-Fi juice. I don't know if y'all saw the blip there, but we did get cut out for just a second. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. I do want to share with you right quick one more time those resources that Jeanine did share earlier with us. They're so helpful. And even Carrie commented that the Facebook group has been very helpful for her as well. But do definitely check out that field guide. We put the links in the chat. And we can put those in there one more time for everyone. But online, you can purchase the actual book itself, the hardback, or the tangible book itself. Or you can go online and they have kind of like an online quick guide as well at the ODWC website. Those links are in your chat. Also recommend joining the Facebook group if you really want to learn more about identifying snakes. All kinds of wonderful information in there. You can see what other people are posting, learn from their experience as well, and share yours too and get feedback and support from others. So as Carrie's in here saying it's a really fun place to learn. Quiz yourself as people ask for the ID. And of course, there are administrators in there who do oversee and manage the group as well. The last item I just want to leave you with is joining us for our next webinar. We are going to keep it on the letter S and talk about sea turtles. On August 18th, we will have two special guests with us. We will have Sarah Martin, that is in Florida, working for the Nature Conservancy to save sea turtles. And then we will also have Pamela O'Haron, who's going to join us. And she is an Oklahoman from northeastern Oklahoma, but she will also be in Florida because she spends her summers there volunteering to help the sea turtles. It's going to be a great event. I hope you can take time to join us and meet these ladies. And I hope that you enjoyed today's presentation from Jeanine Lackey. We're very grateful that she could join us with her slithery friends, and hope that you all have a great rest of your day. And thank you for joining us from all around Kansas, Colorado, Oklahoma, and beyond. Really appreciate. And Minnesota, I think I saw in there too. So I don't know why, but I want to say Minnesota, like put in the accent, right? So just really appreciate everyone. Great to see you all. Thank you so much for joining us. So good to see you again, and we'll see you again on October 18th. Thanks, everyone. Bye.